Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin. Got the whole crew back together. Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough. You know, coaches say this time of year that really nobody is playing at like 100%. That's kind of how I feel doing the shows and continuing to cover this team. I fought through a little bit of nose congestion the last couple weeks. Now I feel like I'm fighting through some chest congestion. We're more probable than not when it comes to playing day to day, but just, you know, fighting through some little things as we near the end of October, guys. How are we feeling away from covering this very interesting, wild, weird, inconsistent football team?
I feel like we're all game time decisions in life. That's what I am. And we're getting through it. Covering this weird team takes up a lot of energy. I'll tell you that. They don't keep things simple.
A lot of mental energy, and in my case, feeling some physical energy from me as well. Mike, are you a game time decision? Are you day to day? Are you probable? How you feeling?
Fine. I'm available on the injury report. I'm
Not
fine.
even on the injury report.
No, it's just you get used to it after a while. I'm fine. Sorry.
The best ability is availability, as they like to say.
Yeah.
Alex was unavailable for the immediate post-game podcast where Mike and I were recording from the car, similar to what we did from Wisconsin, except it was a little bit of a gloomier conversation, discussed Alabama's 24-17 loss to Tennessee. Alex, I wanted to loop you in at the start of today's show. You wrote a coming to Jesus column, I suppose, a wake-up column, a kind of, hey, like this is just kind of who they are, right? More data points than not that this is a very inconsistent, not elite, oftentimes not even very good football team that we're covering in the Alabama Crimson Tide in the year of our Lord 2024. A few days removed now from the game. How are you feeling? Do you have any thoughts on the game that you'd still like to get off your chest? Any takes that you feel like you need to get off? What's the vibe like?
Well, it felt like an extension of what we've seen. I mean, everybody who thought Alabama was a playoff team, myself included, I show you October. Good luck rationalizing that. It was a frustrating performance in the sense that we've been waiting on the defense, and then it finally showed up, and it wasn't enough because the offense struggled. I was going to say something worse, but they struggled. And the fact that you get 3 turnovers, 0 points off of turnovers, they just left so much on the field. And what struck me after the game as different was the tone of DeBoer. He seemed like it finally hit him that, yeah, my positivity, the ball's an odd shapes thing and bounces weird ways. There was none of that. It was, we're not a complete football team. We don't have a killer instinct. We've got to go out and fix these issues. I just don't know how you fix them necessarily. And it's just, they're in a weird point. If I have any take that I want to get off my chest, it's just complete annoyance with a large, not insignificant section of the fan base that wants to connect everything to Nick Saban. And I get it, like it's only been 9 months or whatever the heck it's been, but we're making arguments about discipline and other things that just aren't true. There were discipline issues under Nick, whether you're talking about behavioral issues or penalties on the field. And just frankly, the game has changed. I think people, I don't know if they necessarily are glossing over the last few years, but it's not like their margin for error was exactly huge as compared to 17, 18, 19. So I think there's some arguments being made that are disingenuous at best. But you know what? When you're losing and we're the number 1 ranked team less than a month ago, I guess people have a right to be upset.
I was having a conversation with my dad yesterday. We were watching the Monday Night Football games, and we were sending Patrick Mahomes memes back and forth because he truck sticked San Francisco's linebacker. That's not the point here. The point here is he said, rough road trip for the Tide, to which I said, they may not have it this year. And he comes back with, nobody should be surprised. They lost a lot of talent, and DeBoer goes about things differently. And I thought that was interesting, one, because, my parents live in Kansas City. They are not in the day-to-day in the same way that we are. They kind of take the 3,000-foot view on these things. Mike, I'll throw this to you. Is it that simple that there was just maybe a little too much turnover, that the coaching changed? Like there's almost like a clash of culture and identity when you think about the way that this Alabama team is built, that, yeah, like this inconsistency was probably going to show up in some form or another. And in the case of this year's team, it has shown up with 2 October losses. Is that maybe too simple of thinking?
I
think there's some overly simple arguments being made in general out there. I think the whole idea of Kalen DeBoer needs to get his own guys in the building, I think, is a little bit overrated to me, because I don't know who his own guys are. It's like, what are you going to do? Go raid Washington's roster? Like, all those guys are in the NFL. Like, where are his guys? If you mean his guys, like guys that he recruited, I guess, but playing a bunch of freshmen next year, I don't know if it's going to fix the problem. And then if those guys don't play, those guys are probably out the door through the portal. So, like, trying to get your guys, like, I don't know if that's the issue. I don't know if it's a bunch of Saban guys rebelling against Kalen DeBoer. I don't get that sense from this team. I don't get the sense of like a clash of Jeremy Bernard and Parker Brailsford and Austin Mack on one side of the room and Malachi Moore and all these Saban guys on the other. And it's like Anchorman when they all come to that back alley and fight each other. Like, I just don't picture that. I don't think that's their problem. I think that whole concept is a little bit overrated to me. I do think there's probably an adjustment to how players have been coached and how they're now being coached, but that probably applies on a lot of different levels. Like, Keon Sabb wasn't a Saban or DeBoer guy last year, and I think he's perfectly fine. And obviously he's hurt now, but I think, like, from a coaching standpoint, I think he's mature and I think he's done everything right. That Deshaun Jones came from Wake Forest, like Gino Vandermark came from Michigan State. Like, you guys come from everywhere, and guys are going to come from everywhere next year too, because you're going to be going into the portal to find guys from other teams. So try to build a team of like DeBoer guys. I just don't know what that means. I don't really get that whole concept. I don't know if you try to get your own guys in. I'm like, what are you going to do? Fire Clinton Dix, like fire Josh Chapman, fire the Saban guys? Like, I don't think that would make sense either. Fire Freddie Roach, fire Robert Gillespie. Like, I don't think that will go over well. So the whole concept of this clash of cultures, to me, is a little bit overrated. I do think from the start, this was a team that was going to be deficient in some areas like that. I just linked to the column I wrote in January saying, like, when they lost Caleb Downs and look, a lot of those guys left before Saban even retired. Saban saying 26 guys left when I retired is wrong. That is false. There was 10 guys in the portal, or it was 14. There was 4 from December and 10 who went into the portal before Saban even retired. So that's 14. And then only 10 guys left after he retired. So this was already happening before Saban got in front of the room on January 10th and said, I'm out. But regardless, the volume of players they lost is high. Granted, if you're sitting here and looking name by name, are they missing Antonio Kite? Are they missing Isaiah Hastings? Are they missing Anquin Barnes? Like, there's a lot of names on that list that, quite frankly, probably will not have been playing this year. It really comes down to guys like Caleb Downs, Isaiah Bond, maybe Amari Niblack. You got Caden Proctor back. Maybe Trey Amos would be playing. There's not a super long list of guys you lost in the portal that I think would be making a huge difference right now, but there's certainly some. I think it's the NFL draft losses are certainly hurting them, losing Kool-Aid, losing Terrion. Some of the other players that they lost, Justin Boygby, there's a decent amount of players that they lost through the draft. And this was going to be a roster that they tried to fill some holes. I thought they did a good job. Parker Brailsford was a good pickup. Bernard was a good pickup. Graham Nicholson, we all thought was a good pickup. It hasn't really been used. Like, they did a pretty good job through the portal. We all thought they made a good move with King Mack and even getting Vandermark and getting Deshaun Jones. Like, those were fine. So, were they going to win a national title? No, I don't think any of us picked them to do that. Were they going to go undefeated? No. Could we have seen this team losing one game? Maybe. This team losing 2 or 3 games, I think, is probably in line with what our expectations were, but it's also who they're losing to and the way that they're playing games that I think is different than what our expectation was, and I think is causing more alarm than what we would have expected. So losing to Vandy, as improved as they may be, in a non-hostile environment in Nashville was bad. Playing the way they did against South Carolina was bad. Playing the way they did for most of that game against South Florida was bad. Playing the way they did in the second half against Georgia was bad. Playing the way they did against Tennessee was actually probably expected. Like, this was probably the game that most fit our expectations for the season. Like, it was a close game. They lost to a team that probably has more talent on defense, especially in Tennessee. And, I think the biggest frustrating factor of that game, though, was the penalties and just the stupid things that were done to contribute to the loss. But the loss itself was not overly unexpected or shocking. So that's kind of where I am. However, I will say not to go too far down the road, I don't think the idea of like this was a rebuilding year and then next year Alabama is putting it all together. I don't think that's the case either, because there's still going to be a lot of losses this offseason. You have 10 seniors, you're going to lose 4, 5, 6 juniors maybe, and then you're going to lose players to the portal, undoubtedly. So you could have another 30 players walking right out the door, and you're talking about a lot of the same things by next summer that we were just talking about this summer in terms of the turnover.
The problem is they showed us how good they could be in the first half.
They tease people.
They skewed the expectation. Because I do think if you're right, and Cody, you brought this up on the last time we were talking, if you laid out the schedule and said at this point in the year they'd be that, everybody would be like, yeah, sure, that's likely. They would have lost to Georgia and Tennessee. Well, they didn't lose to Georgia. They lost to Vanderbilt. And that's what has them in this ditch. The fan base is panicked. On a scale of 1 to 10, as far as like DeBoer futures, I think they're way past 5. Where are you guys at on a scale of 1 to 10 with DeBoer, and how concerned you are, not for this season but for the future?
I'm not at a 5. I think it's a difference between being panicked about it and thinking that something's going to happen because of that, if that makes any sense. Like there's no way Greg Byrne could do anything after 1 year, and there's no way. I think there's very little chance that he would even do anything after 2 years, because of they gave him an 8-year contract with a lot of money on it. And you kind of are committed to a guy like that for 3 years. So regardless of whatever your panic level is in 2024 or maybe even 2025, I don't think it matters. Like, I don't think it moves the needle in terms of a change. Yeah. So I do think there is a level of, again, it's multifaceted. Like, I think we've talked about it. Like, obviously the messaging from DeBoer, I think, has been problematic at times. I think he needs to learn kind of the stage that he's on and how to handle the attention that's on him and is on everything that he says and everything that he critiques the team about or doesn't critique the team about. Like, everybody's watching that t-shirt that he wears, the color spaghetti that he eats, like everything, they're watching everything. So
real ones now.
Yeah, that's a previous show, but
it's a great running bit though.
Right. There's like everything he does, and that's totally different than how it was certainly at Sioux Falls. It's different than what it was at Fresno State, and it's different than what it was at Washington. Like, this is new to him. I think there is a certain amount of, I don't want to say deer in the headlights, but there's just a newness to it, and you can kind of feel him feeling it, if that makes any sense. So I think you have to get through that, and I think time will help with that. Experience will help with that, and he will probably be better at talking to the world, whether it's fans or the media or players or whoever, by this time next year than he is right now. And I think that's just the natural progression of things. The coaching style, I don't know. Like, it's just, it's going to be what it is. And I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if it's not going to work. I think at the end of the day, it still matters what your players do on the field, probably more than, what you're saying in the locker room at halftime or what you're saying in the locker room before the game. Like, that only goes so far. You need to get good players in next year and the next 2 years. So that, to me, is still the most important thing. And where I am on the panic meter, I don't know. It's somewhere under 5, but it's certainly not a 0. I think there's legitimate concerns about where things are. But again, I don't think anything's going to change because of that.
Yeah, I'm in like a 2.5. Like, it's not been great. This doesn't bode well. But I'm also not going to forget that this dude's won a bunch of football games, and there are a lot of things working against him, and there's a lot of newness still at play.
It's kind of where I'm at, probably sitting at a 1. I think he'll be here. I think he's a smart enough ball coach to figure it out. He's also kind of a trial by fire, right? Like, first time in the SEC, it's different from the Pac-12. It's different from, coaching at Fresno. It's a whole total world different away from coaching NAIA ball or being a coordinator, working your way up through predominantly group of 5 teams. I'd like to think he'll figure that part of it out. The talent acquisition part, I think he's smart enough to put people in place to do that and to collaborate with them, right? There's a reason Courtney Morgan was on the plane with him when he first arrived in Tuscaloosa last January. I think there's a lot of faith in him that they can assemble a roster that fits what DeBoer wants to do. The one thing that does interest me is if they do lose another game, and Mike and I kind of talked about this on the ride home. I forget if this was actually, I think it was on the podcast as well, what staff changes he makes after a potential third loss, or if they can't get it figured out by early next season. That I think is the interesting thing to monitor. And maybe it's recency bias, but at first we're going into this Tennessee game thinking about the defensive staff. Is this working? Does he need to go find somebody else that's maybe outside of his friend orbit? Now you're looking at the way that the offense struggled. I don't know. What do you guys think about potential staff changes? Mike, I know we had this conversation on the ride home, but I don't know. I think that's the thing to monitor as opposed to will DeBoer be here for, however long.
Yeah, I think if you go 10-2, you missed the SEC championship game. Let's say you're not in the playoff and you're playing in the Citrus Bowl or whatever. I think it might be easier to sell the status quo and just let's run it back with the same staff next year, assuming, everybody stays. Like everybody, theoretically, other guys could go and get jobs elsewhere. But in terms of not firing anybody, I think you could probably sell that. I think if you lose another game, especially if you lose 2 more games somehow, like Oklahoma, Auburn, whatever. I mean, my wife said if they lose to Auburn, that it's over. Like, just clean house. I think that might be how the fans think too.
I don't think she's wrong as far as the fan base.
Right. So, let's just say they lose one more game. Let's say they lose to LSU. You have a 3-loss team. I think there is probably a certain level of pressure for DeBoer to do something staff-wise. I don't know if it's firing Kane Womack. I don't know if that's the solution. That's kind of how football works. Sometimes you just need to make a token change somewhere, and it's hard to predict exactly where that is. Sometimes there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff between a coach and a coordinator, or a coordinator and his assistants, that you just don't know about. You don't know how those relationships are. You don't know how the head coach is evaluating the job performance of any assistant. So those things are very hard to predict, but it certainly happens a lot where a coach just bring up Saban in a positive light. It happens with Saban all the time. Like there's coaches who just don't get retained or, go somewhere else. And it didn't work out. The relationship wasn't there. So and these are a lot of coaches that don't know DeBoer, haven't worked with DeBoer before too. So, you do a trial run for a year and maybe there's a guy that just, you say it's not working out. Like it wouldn't shock me if that's the case. So again, it's hard to predict where exactly that would be. But I think if you're talking about a 3-loss Alabama team, I do think there's some level of pressure for DeBoer to do something and not just retain the status quo. I think in Alabama that pressure is going to exist.
I agree.
Alex, you spent part of your Monday with Nick Saban. We're as bad as the fans by covering 2 head coaches, but welcome to the beast.
He's an Alabama employee. We can't say that.
He is an Alabama employee, so we do have there is something of an obligation to cover him. What was it like spending your Monday with Nick Saban? What interesting things did he have to say? What did you kind of glean from his media availability? He seemed like he was in pretty good mood.
Yeah, he was. I mean, what does he have to complain about? He gets to fly in a jet and go on game day, cash a bunch of checks, and take it easy during the week. I mean,
he's escort around Alabama in his Mercedes.
Yeah, he's got people with him. Cedric was there. Josh was there. I mean, you got the whole crew. You could see old players. Harrison Jones was there. Barrett Jones' brother stopped by and said hi. It was interesting because it's at first they're like, we want to talk about the Monday Morning Quarterback Club. It's like, well, we're going to talk about Alabama a little bit. And Nick was fine. You could tell he was prepared to kind of say, look, I'm a fan. And he said, like, I don't know how true it is if you watch game day all the time, but he said, look, I try to let other people take the lead in terms of the analysis of Alabama because he does come at it from a different perspective. Mike's shaking his head because
I think Nick's saying that on Monday. I think what Nick says Friday on Pat McAfee's show, and I think what Nick says Saturday morning on College Game Day are going to be 2 different things.
Yes.
Because that's Nick Saban showing up in Alabama as a fan,
wearing a crimson coat and saying, look, we need to support them. This is not supporting the players through it. They're going to figure it out. And he reiterated that multiple times. I actually found it more interesting what he said to Pat McAfee on Friday, talking about like, look, this is a transition. This is something that's going to take a little bit of time. You got to give, and he did use the line, which I agree with Mike, that getting your own guys in there is kind of a fallacy, but Nick said that himself as well. So I think he understands as well as anybody the difficult situation that Kalen DeBoer's in, and I don't think he wants to be the one to throw dirt on the grave. So he's walking a fine line there.
This is also a guy who 2 weeks ago called them arrogant. Yes. So
But that was a criticism of players,
right?
I think, more than anything.
Yeah, sorry, them. I don't know if it sounded like him. Them
Yeah.
is what I was saying, but he's kind of playing it both ways. I will have to say that with Saban.
I did think it was mildly interesting that he was thrown the question of, are they living up to the standard? And he said, I don't think that's for me to say. He did go on to say that it's my job to support them and be there for them. But I think a lot of Alabama fans are using that line, and I think rightfully so, in a sense. Like, we're used to a certain level of football, and it's not there. But again, I don't think Nick is going to be the one to come out with the hot take that this staff has failed.
Right.
I don't think we're there yet.
I think it's strategic. I think the fact that it wasn't a yes indicates it was a no, but he didn't want to say no. I think that's kind of Saban speak sometimes. And I just don't think he wanted to be, was it Jeff Spiegel? Was Jeff's there? Like ABC 3340, you had Channel 13 in Birmingham. Like, I don't think he wanted to be on the Monday night news talking shit about Alabama, for lack of a better term. Like, I just don't think strategically, like you said, his PR person was there. Like, I just don't think that's what he wanted to do. But he says in Bloomington, Indiana, in 4 days could be very different.
Yeah, but he has said, I go back to SEC Media Days, and there was a small scrum of about 7-8 reporters, and I was in there with them with Nick, and he said, I don't want to be critical. I don't think it's my job to be critical of coaches. Now, we can all roll our eyes and say, yes, it kind of is your job now, but I think he's going to be as tactful as he can be when it comes to criticizing individuals. And it's the same thing. Like, he was thrown the top. What about Auburn? Last question was, what about Auburn? And he went on to praise Hugh Freeze,
his friend.
And it's like, how are you praising a team that is an abject dumpster fire right now? But that's kind of how he's coming at it from this point of view right now.
Right. He does it sometimes, though, with, I'm not trying to be, he did it on game day on this past Saturday. He was talking about Ohio State against Oregon. And he said, I'm not being critical of anybody, but their defense that they ran is archaic. Or not archaic, it was antiquated, is what he said. Yeah, Nick Saban calls Ohio State's defense antiquated. But he started out, he said, I'm not being critical of somebody's philosophy at Ohio State, but there's so much four-man rush, simulated pressure, still able to play the coverages that you play. And he says, I think in this day and age of football, you got to go down that road a little bit, or you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And he called them antiquated. So just to preface a statement like that and say, I'm not being critical, and then be critical, I don't know if it erases the
meaning of version of no offense, but
right. Exactly. It's, I think at some point you just have to embrace your role, and you're taking millions of dollars from ESPN to do what you're doing. And yes, that involves being critical sometimes. And I think if Nick Saban gets up on College Game Day the rest of the season and punts on any Alabama questions, I think there's going to be a certain level of disappointment from ESPN, given that they're paying him to be the Alabama expert and to tell us what's wrong with this team. So, and I don't think he'll do that. I think he's going to be honest. And I think this was just a particular setting in Birmingham where he didn't want to do that. And what he does the rest of the year could be different.
It's also kind of different to do it on game day on Saturday. Like, you do it in the morning, you get it off, people write about it, and then there's a million games that happen, right? Not saying that it gets buried, but there is a little bit of that to it, right? Where everybody kind of gets distracted by the games. Whereas if you do it on a Monday night in Birmingham, where there's really nothing else to kind of bury it, so to speak, like, it'll sit and linger there for basically the remainder of the week until he pops up on McAfee. And who knows if McAfee will ask him about it or whatever the case may be. I'm sure I don't know if that's on Saban's mind, but I'm sure that that's also probably part of it too.
And to take it a step further, if he says it on Monday, coaches and players have to answer for it. If he says it on Friday and Saturday, they don't.
Right. But
he knows how to play the game. He's a smart dude.
This reality is going to continue for indefinitely. Like, he's not going anywhere on College Game Day. And unless he just gets up and quits in a couple of years, like, this is going to be true every single week for the next indefinite number of years. And I think over time, especially if his players are gone from Alabama, I think he might loosen up a little bit in terms of what he's willing to say.
That means we're going to spend the next indefinite number of years watching McAfee on Fridays and game day on Saturdays, right? Like, that sounds...
Until it changes, that's just what it is.
Continuing to cover 2 head coaches. Mike and I were in Tuscaloosa to talk to the current head coach, Kalen DeBoer. Him, Kane Womack, Nick Sheridan all do their weekly media availabilities on Monday. Had some interesting questions, I thought, for each of them, but wanted to kind of direct our focus to a couple of them that Mike asked. Kind of funny, kind of interesting. Didn't really get a lot in the way of answers. Let's start here. There was a fourth down QB sneak in the game on Saturday where Milroe converted. It didn't look like he converted, but the refs kind of gave him the yard or inches or whatever he needed to convert. But during the QB sneak, Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard both hit step back jumpers, which, a lot of Alabama fans are maybe taking as, you talk about reactions to things that this football program is doing, like maybe it's basketball season already in Tuscaloosa, to which some diehard Hoopers would say it always was. Mike, you asked Nick Sheridan about that, and his answer wasn't really much in the way of an answer, basically saying that everything that happens on the field is coached. What do we make of that?
Honestly, don't know. I have no idea. Like, I was sitting there and I had no idea. I don't know. You can take it three different ways. You can take it that he meant it was part of a design play and they were trying to distract something, and maybe it's something they were trying to do down the road and do a fake sneak and throw it outside, and he just didn't want to reveal anything, and that's why he was coy the way he was. That's theory number one. Theory number two is that he was trying to say that it wasn't something that he approved of, and him saying everything on the field is coached is maybe a way of him saying, I talked to those players about it. I told them not to do that again, and that's coaching them. And then there's theory number three, which is when I asked him the question, he had no idea what I was talking about and just gave an answer that was very generic and vague because he didn't know what I was talking about. 33% for each of those three answers. I have no idea. Literally no idea.
Alex, which one are you buying?
Not only do I not know, I don't care. I don't care. I honestly don't. Is it dumb? Yeah. I don't think he didn't know what you were talking about. He seemed to recognize it and seemed to have a little bit of a, that's all I'm going to say about that thing going on. But I don't really care. Like, receivers do weird shit all the time. They weren't going to affect the play in any way. Like, who cares?
So I was asked about this on the radio Monday morning. It was one of the first questions, in fact, which always signals to me that people are talking about it. And I knew it was something that I saw on our board being discussed. It was something that was being discussed on Twitter. So I think there's a certain level of attention on it. And my answer on the radio was, it obviously didn't affect the play. Like, it's a quarterback sneak. The receivers are on the outside. The only argument you can make there was, in fact, it happened earlier in the game when Milroe snuck through the line and damn near broke through and got his feet, tripped up. In theory, you would want your receivers moving downfield to block in that situation. If Milroe does go through the line and you have a situation where maybe you need to block a safety, even then, Ryan Williams is fast. I don't know if he's getting in front of Jalen Milroe to block. Jalen Milroe is potentially faster. Who the hell knows? To me, and I said this on the radio, it's not as much about the reality of like it didn't really matter because they're just on the outside of the field screwing around. It's the perception. And I think given what's being said about this team, anything like that looks bad. And there probably needs to be a realization of we can't be looking like that because people don't want us to look like that. That's where they're at. And people get mad about that stuff and it's dumb, but it's still there. Like, it still exists. That conversation is still out there. It's still something that people I hear about on the radio, whatever. Like, if people are talking about it, you don't want it. Just don't make it a topic of conversation. Just don't do it. Kind of like the t-shirt.
And you're right. You're 100% right. But God dang, can we just, like, to use a Nick Saban thing, can we keep the main thing the main thing? This isn't the main thing. This isn't the side dish. This isn't the appetizer. This isn't the dinner roll. This isn't the salad. This isn't the dressing on the salad. This is barely a freaking crouton. Like, what are we talking about? Like, it's insane. And you know what it reminded me of? Everybody loved when the Arkansas State player fainted on that play. Remember that, where he fell back? And loved it. This, oh my God, clutched my pearls. How could they? They don't take the game seriously. Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard are two of the best players on the team, two of the most productive players on the team. There aren't some slappies out there. They're producing. Like, Give me a freaking break with all this stuff.
It tends to be where I fall on things, like pretty harmless. I feel like people are trying a little bit too hard to get mad. And that's even while acknowledging that there have been a few different times this year where Alabama looks like it's lost its poise and its focus. I'm not sure that falls into the same bucket, but Mike asked the question yesterday. I thought it was interesting. I went down the Twitter rabbit hole, and then I realized that people were kind of frustrated online about this, and I thought it was kind of interesting because I didn't understand why. It was
the question was worthwhile. The response is what causes some of the drama. Is just say, hey, it's something we do. We think it's going to distract them. Fine.
Right. And that honestly was what I was expecting him to say. And it would have, from a PR perspective, from their side, it would have diffused it.
Yeah.
But that's where we are.
Perhaps receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard will give us a little bit more insight. We usually hear from him during the midweek. It's not 100% sure that we'll get him.
Sorry to interrupt. Shep is an interesting character because, like I said, he had that thing after the Georgia game where he was like, you're asking any question about the Georgia game, we're focused on Vandy. He's a very intense guy. I do not picture him wanting to talk one single lick about the Tennessee game, even if we try to. He's an interesting guy. I don't know if that question would go over well with him. I don't think he would just sit there and talk about what they were doing.
Somebody's got to answer it, though. Just answer it to get it out of the freaking way because it's dumb. And to be clear, Mike is right in everything he's saying. Fans clearly care about this. They also want to complain when Ryan Williams gets too many targets and not enough. They want to complain that Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams get the ball too much and nobody else does. Like, what are we even talking about? Come on.
The other thing that was asked, and this was of Kane Womack, was that weird illegal substitution penalty where it kind of looked like in real time that maybe Tennessee had made a substitution, and in the game, when the offense makes a substitution, the defense is allowed to make a substitution. Upon the rewatch, that was not the case. Right. Tennessee already had their 11 guys on the field. Alabama looked like they had a little bit of a miscommunication in terms of the personnel they wanted on the field, so they had guys running on and off, and it appeared as if, I think it was Mo Linguist or one of the assistants, pushed King Mack as if to say, get back on the field, and he fell down and took injury time in air quotes if you're not watching the YouTube video. Mike, you asked about this as well. What did we make of Kane Womack's response to this / just the entire ordeal?
Right. So, I mean, my question was worded intentionally, not to say vague, but like open-ended enough where I wasn't just talking about King Mack probably flopping. Like I understand Kane Womack's not going to stand up there and be like, oh yeah, King Mack flopped. Like it was more about like what happened in general on that play, because that was kind of the last stage of that debacle. And I agree. I think we disagreed on it in the press box real time, where I didn't see anything from Tennessee that was obvious in terms of causing Alabama to have confusion. I rewatched the game, or not the game, but I rewatched that play, and there was nothing there. It was out of that kickoff, so it's a timeout. Guys are on the field, just with coaches. They come out of the timeout. Tennessee guys are just jogging back to the sideline. There's nobody trying to stay on the field. There's no, or it is gamesmanship. There's no anything Tennessee was doing to try to trick Alabama. There's nothing there that I saw. Just guys going back to the sideline. I think typically Tennessee does align with a receiver on each side of the field with the wide splits. And so Mbakwe was on that side of the field, but once they came out of the huddle, there was nobody on his side. The receivers were both on the other side, and they had two tight ends in the game. So I don't know how different that look was. And then Mbakwe kind of throws up his hands like, who the hell am I covering out here? But Tennessee had 11 guys in the field. Alabama had 11 guys on the field. All of a sudden, Alabama, once the play clock starts, tries to make a substitution for whatever reason. And they brought on Jefferson and Jamarian Latham. So that's two guys on. And then they had King Mack coming off. So even with that, that would have been 12 guys. Jefferson was trying to run on the field, and I think he was coming in for Jihad because he was like kind of waving his hand at somebody. And meantime, the play clock's running. Tennessee's ready to snap the ball. Alabama players kind of have their hands up like this, like looking like, what's the play call? Like they didn't know what to do. They were looking towards the sideline, and they're still trying to substitute. So Jihad stays on the field because I think he was ready to be a defender. So then you have Jefferson on the field. You have Latham who came on and then turned right back. So that at that point, if you had Latham off, if you had Mack off, you had 11. You're essentially replacing Jefferson for Mack. But then Linguist pushed Mack back onto the field. So then he's on the field as your 12th player. And that's the moment when Tennessee snapped the ball. And as Mack went out, that's when he went down. I don't know if he realized he was the 12th guy. I don't know if he just said, we're screwing this up. I got to go down to stop the clock, or to stop the play. It obviously, I think to most of us, looked like a fake injury. Greg McElroy said it right away in the broadcast, but it really wasn't something that was caused to me by Tennessee. It seemed more a confusion of Alabama players, Jefferson not getting someone to come off for him, and then Mac getting pushed back on the field by Linguist when in fact they were already fine as it was. So that's what I was really asking Womack about. And he didn't say anything about that. Like what happened, basically. He really focused more on the fact that Mac went down, and his answer, I think was to be expected kind of BS. Like the training staff does a great job and, happy you could come back into the game. Like, I think you kind of have to say that as a coach. Otherwise you're going to come off like it was a fake injury. But it didn't alleviate anybody's concerns about this defensive staff having the mechanics down. And that's something that their own player, Malachi Moore, a couple weeks ago, put out there to the world, that the play calls were not coming in soon enough. And he put that doubt out there. And then you had a situation where, like I said, you had a bunch of players throwing up their arms and looking at the sideline when Tennessee was snapping the ball. So judge it as you will.
Well, and I think that's, I don't want to say indicative of a bigger problem, but we've got more data points where there are clearly some communication issues on that sideline. You go back to Vanderbilt, the illegal numbering that ruined a third down stop and ultimately led to a Vanderbilt touchdown. The end of the first half against South Carolina, not fully understanding where the timeouts were, what the game process was, and then the whole Jeremy Bernard thing, scoring a touchdown that nearly cost them the game after what South Carolina was able to do. And now you've got this issue with the illegal substitution against Tennessee. It was only a 5-yard penalty. And if you want to, you can chalk it up to crowd noise and the Alabama's just inability to communicate for most of the game. But still, that is, once is an accident, 2 is a trend, 3 is evidence. Alex, what do we make of this?
Big deal, little deal, no deal. Somewhere between little and no. Because at the end of the day, the defense did the job. I mean, that's kind of, yes, in the grand scheme of things, they've been not clean at times. They had Tennessee. I mean, they played pretty well against Tennessee. I don't think it was the defense's fault they lost that football game. 3 turnovers fall in their lap. No points. Missed field goals. It's just interceptions. Like, they're the story of the game. This is a side story that's interesting. And yes, maybe we look back on it a few months from now and say, man, they just got to get their bleep together. But these things do happen in the course of games. It's not like we're watching Ole Miss faking injuries every other possession. Yeah. Weirdly doing it on offense. Like, I don't think this was like a nefarious thing. I think they just went, rat trap, to use a Nick Saban phrase. But I don't think it's the defense's fault they lost that game.
I think it's similar to the Vanderbilt game in that everybody was focused on the defense after the Vandy game, and everybody said the offense is fine. Like, you don't have to worry about the offense. I think even Mark Ingram said we have an elite offense after the Vandy game. And I was sitting there thinking, well, you threw an interception, a pick 6 early in the game that wasn't just, there was a random element to it, but at the same time, it was a throw into a tight window. And then you had Jalen Milroe's illegal forward pass penalty, which screwed them in that moment when it was a third down and he had a completion. And there was other aspects of the offense, the running game against Vandy, that just weren't good enough. And yes, the majority of the blame for the Vandy game fell on the defense, but that doesn't mean the offense was absolved. And I think the opposite is true here. The majority of the blame falls on the offense for the Tennessee game, but that does not mean the defense is absolved. I think to give up 214 rushing yards, including in the second half alone, 170 rushing yards to Tennessee in the second half of a game where, in fact, you were ahead for a decent amount of the second half. And it's not like you were playing a team that was just sitting on the ball and just running it, the entire second half with a big lead. Like, Tennessee ran down your throat when they were trying to get the game in hand, when they were trying to get the lead. So that is alarming to me. I think there was missed opportunities through the air that Tennessee had, whether it was Nico overthrowing a receiver, that happened a couple times, or whether it was a receiver dropping the pass. There was one down the right sideline in front of us in the press box I can think of. I think that would look worse. If you hit 1 or 2 of those, you're talking about Tennessee putting 500 yards on you. They finished at 408. And again, it's not garbage time yards either. Like, they scored 3 touchdowns on you in the second half when they needed to. And Tennessee you probably benefited by the Nico injury, whatever the heck it was, and then Gaston Moore coming in and just heaving the ball up. Like, that's one of your turnovers. But like, I'll give credit to Malachi Moore for catching it. It just, I don't know if that's like the top of my highlight reel of like Alabama's defense is great. They caught a Hail Mary from
I
Gaston.
don't think they were great. I just don't think they're the reason they lost the game.
I think they were part of the reason. I think the offense was the bigger reason, but I think both sides of the ball.
If I had told you 3 months ago they would give up 3 touchdowns to Tennessee on the road, you take that every single day of the week.
Tennessee's defense is potentially the best in the country. I think I came into this game thinking Alabama was going to struggle to get to 20, 25 points. I think I predicted 28-23 was my final. Like, I think you knew this game was going to be a tight game because of the way Tennessee has played, which is their offense has not looked particularly great. And that's the thing. Like, I think Alabama's defense probably looked worse than Florida's defense did against Tennessee, probably looked worse than Arkansas's defense did against Tennessee. Like, that to me is a problem. And I think you had to go into this game playing a tighter defensive sort of struggle. And that's what it was for most of the game. And I agree. Alabama's offense needed to do a much better job. Jalen Milroe, we haven't even gotten to him. I don't know if we will, is a problem. But the defense still, to me, giving up 408 yards in the second half in particular, giving up second half yards per play. Tennessee had 6.3 yards per play to Alabama's 4.6. In the first half, Tennessee was at 4.9 yards per play. So you're giving up a yard and a half more per play in the second half to Tennessee without any turnovers to help you. The way this defense played in the second half was not good enough to me. Other than that,
based on what? So,
What?
like, based on what? How many all SEC players are on that defense?
right. That's the thing. It's like, I'm not saying that they should be, the 85 Bears, but it's not good enough. Like, regardless, like, that's the problem. Like, maybe you can't be better, but that doesn't mean that you're good, if that makes any sense. Like, it's whether you have
good enough
players
to
or not.
win if the offense does what they're even halfway capable of, and they didn't.
Yeah, and I have questions about what the offense is capable of at this point, because I think defenses have figured out Jalen Milroe. I think it's 4 games in a row now, 3.5 games at least, where you can stop him as a runner, especially in between the 20s. Like, you can really bring him down as a passer and make him look bad. And you can stop this running game. I think a lot of teams have done that.
Yeah.
As long as there's not a big play down the field to Ryan Williams that you just can't defend, like, you're in a pretty good spot as any defense against this Alabama offense. I have questions about the ceiling and the capability of this offense. Again, I'm not by any means trying to absolve the offense. I agree. They are the bigger reason why they lost this game. But I think potentially we're talking about the defense again next week, because Luther Burden is the best receiver that this team has faced all year. I don't think there's a ton of doubt about that. You have a secondary that's already missing Keon Sabb and has guys like Xavier Brown banged up, whoever else, is out there banged up. Like, Luther Burden hits a few plays on you, you're going to be talking about the defense next week. It's kind of a boomerang back and forth thing here, but I don't feel good about the defense.
Luther Burden has not had a touchdown catch in his last 3 games. Auburn held him to 6 receptions for 49 yards. UMass, powerhouse that is, 5 receptions, 59 yards.
Yep. And would it shock anybody if he had the game of his season against Alabama?
It's possible, but I also don't think it's a done deal that he's just going to roast.
Oh, I don't think it is either. But
he shows first-round potential in flashes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he dominates on a week-in, week-out basis.
Yep. Regardless, I still think he's the best receiver that they've played.
Yes. No, I think that's right.
And he might be the best receiver they play all year. I mean, unless who am I missing on LSU? That
Kyron Lacey, potentially.
I mean, Auburn has some receivers that in time might be better, and then Mercer and Oklahoma don't. So he's the best receiver on your schedule. I'm not saying that's saying a ton, but I think we could be talking about the defense next week is my point.
Yeah, that's possible.
To tie a bow on the Tennessee game, after Alabama scored a touchdown to go up 17-14, that was a Justice Haynes 7-yard run. They ran 11 more offensive plays, netted a grand total of 3 yards, I believe it was. So I'm in the camp that the offense was the issue largely. I know that the defense might be at fault for a little bit, but probably more 90-10 on the offense. You guys made the transition for me into the Mizzou game. Wanted to wrap up today's show with some early thoughts on that. The Tigers are going to come to Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday, kickoff 2:30 p.m. ABC is going to carry the game. Tigers are 6-1, 2-1. We pegged them as a dangerous team in the preseason. Hard to get a read on this team, to be quite honest. They have blitzed through their non-conference schedule, save for a 27-21 September win over Boston College back when they were playing pretty well. They have since dealt with injuries and have fallen off a little bit. They went to Texas A&M and took a thrashing 41-10 loss to the Aggies, who are currently at the top of the SEC right now. Shout out to them. They rebounded with a pretty lopsided win over UMass, who has 3 SEC games this season. And then they overcame some really weird self-inflicted mistakes and a Brady Cook injury to rally and defeat Auburn last week, 21-17. So they're 6-1, they're 2-1. I think there are still dangerous elements about this team. You guys mentioned Luther Burden. Brady Cook is an experienced quarterback. He has struggled to hit the deep ball this season. It seems like every quarterback Alabama has played outside of maybe Carson Beck has struggled to hit the deep ball this season. But still plenty of talent on that team, I think, on both sides. Give Missouri this. They may have looked underwhelming thus far this season, but they're still 6-1. They're still 2-1. Those are both better records than what Alabama currently has. I know they haven't played exactly the same schedule, but they do have a win over Vanderbilt, something Alabama cannot say this season. Alex, I'll throw it to you. What are some early thoughts on the Missouri Tigers?
Yeah, they've been a little underwhelming. They're dangerous for a different reason. I don't really look at them as true playoff contenders at this point. I know their record's still there, but I think they're dangerous in the respect of, do you put Alabama further on its heels, finding a way to beat them? Because I don't think they're worse than South Carolina. The thing I wonder about with Missouri is, do they have the pass rush to really affect Jalen Milroe? I was looking it up really quickly. They don't have anybody with 3 or more sacks on their team. They've got a bunch of guys with 2, but I don't think they have a premier pass rusher, and that's really what's hurt Alabama at times, whether you're talking about the South Carolina game, even against Tennessee, the pressure got to Jalen Milroe. Does that sort of help Alabama in terms of its game plan? I don't know. I just don't think we know enough about Alabama being a complete football team to say that, oh, they're going to be comfortably figuring out a way to win this game. The Luther Burden coverage piece of it's going to be very interesting. Can they get to Brady Cook on the other side of things? A guy who's coming off of an injury. We don't know whether that lingers or not. There's some things to watch, but I think I'm more interested in what Alabama puts on the football field and how they respond when it's pretty bleak right now. You got no margin for error. You lose a game, you're out. So how do they respond to that? I'm not entirely confident it'll be great, because he didn't respond to Vanderbilt. He didn't really respond to South Carolina, but maybe that's the kick in the rear end that gets them going, is losing at Tennessee.
Let's not forget about Nate Noel either. Their running back, 199 yards and 24 carries against Vandy, 121 yards and 22 carries against BC. Is not nearly done as much against Auburn and A&M, but this rushing defense has some vulnerability there. And, he's not Dylan Sampson by any means, but could Nate Noel have a decent game against Alabama? I could envision that the same way I can envision Luther Burden have a pretty good game as well.
And that could potentially set up the play action for Brady Cook to Luther Burden to Theo Weiss, who is currently their leading receiver. Him and Luther Burden have similar numbers. You look at play action, Brady Cook, pretty efficient out of play action passes. That's according to Pro Football Focus. The other thing that kind of sticks out about this Missouri team, they're not afraid to play in a muck it up type of game, right? You look at their Boston College win. They rallied from down 14-3 to win 27-21. Vanderbilt took them to overtime when Mizzou maybe didn't play their best game. They obviously overcame a Brady Cook injury, or at least he had an injury, and then he came back from the hospital, I guess, mid-game to lead Mizzou from back down 17-3 to beat Auburn 21-17. So this is a team that's kind of comfortable playing in a mess, right? And that seems to be the type of game that Alabama has been playing the last few weeks. I know this game's at Bryant-Denny Stadium. That's going to be a plus for Alabama, at least when you just look at the results from the past month, or at least this stretch of 4 games that they've been playing. Do we think that matters at all? Or Mike, what are some of your early thoughts on this matchup?
It's similar to me going into the South Carolina game, where you're coming off of a loss. You're playing at home against a team you probably should beat. I mean, they're favored by 2 touchdowns, basically. If you play well, I don't know if it really gives me a ton of confidence that they'll turn around in 2 weeks and play well at LSU. Just like if they had won more comfortably against South Carolina, I don't know how confident I would have been going into Tennessee. if they don't play well against Missouri, then you're really not confident going into LSU. So I don't, again, it's the same thing I said before South Carolina. I don't want to call it a no-win situation, but there's a limited amount of positivity that can come out of a win in this game. I think there's a certain bad feeling that can come if you mess around again against Missouri and you win a close game or you lose it. Certainly, if you lose it, you're going into LSU with a lack of confidence. But even if you win, I just don't know. Like, you're totally different environment you're going into in 2 weeks, going into Death Valley, going against a Heisman contender and Garrett Nussmeier. That's just going to be a different animal. So don't you look at me like that.
Heisman contender? Hold up.
He's absolutely in the Heisman race. Are you kidding me? Garrett Nussmeier is the Heisman odds right now. He's right in there. I mean,
I don't know about all that.
He's right there. I mean,
if you roast Alabama, he's going to be in the conversation.
Right. Yeah. His odds are right there with Genty and Cam Ward are probably right up there right now. But right after that is Klubnik and Nussmeier and Dylan Gabriel. Like, that's kind of the odds right now. So
does he have higher odds than Milroe at this point?
Yes, absolutely does.
That makes sense. But are you looking this up on Caesars? I just pulled up FanDuel Sportsbook, and it's got Ward, Genty, Dylan Gabriel, Oregon's quarterback, Travis Hunter, Cade Klubnik, Carson Beck, all ahead of Nussmeier. The first 4 or 5 make a lot of sense to me, but then after that, it seems like there's a pretty steep drop off. Mike's doing the thing where he's putting his phone in front of the
Genty, Dylan Gabriel, Cade Klubnik, Travis Hunter, Garrett Nussmeier.
I think Travis Hunter at plus 1,400 is a little underrated.
He's missing time. Like, that hurts you in a Heisman.
Yes, I get it. But also, hey, shout out to the Buffs for being 5-2. They're putting together a pretty nice season out there. In any case, this Alabama-Missouri game, Alex, I'll throw this back to you. Kind of final thought type question. What kind of performance do you need to see to feel good about this Alabama team going into the bye? Because I tell you what, man, if they continue to play the way that they've been playing, it is not going to be a fun 2 weeks in Tuscaloosa ahead of that LSU matchup.
I think Mike's right. There's a ceiling on how good I can feel with this. It's like I got beta blockers going on. But I think the thing I'd like to see is the thing that Kalen DeBoer lamented against Tennessee is a killer instinct. I don't need you to win 42-0. If you win 21-7, that's fine. But just put the damn game away. When you have the game in your grasp, put it away. That means playing good defense. That means running the football. That means not making boneheaded mistakes. I think they've tried to figure out ways to give games away. They've done it. And then against South Carolina just gave it right back. But the killer instinct part of it is just showing that, hey, we know how to win football games when we deserve to win them. Would be a big step forward. And that's kind of sorry state of affairs to say that. Will we be 8 games into the season at that point?
Mike, what'll make you feel good about this Alabama team going into the bye? Like, what do you need to see to feel maybe not good, but better?
Garrett Nussmeier, 7th in the country, 317 passing yards per game, by the way.
Not my Heisman.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's going to win the Heisman, but I think he's in certainly the mix to go to New York right now. I think that's a fair assessment, especially if he has
solid 6 interceptions right now.
How many does
Nora 6 interceptions in the last 3 games or 4 games? Yeah, it's in terms of what would make me feel good. I agree with Alex. Just don't do stupid stuff. Like, have a game with 3 penalties for 20 yards. Have a game with no turnovers. Have a game where you don't give up a 36-yard touchdown on 4th down. Have a game where you just don't do the things that are aggravating so many people right now. That's what I think would make people feel better. But like I said, I just don't know how good you can feel regardless of how this game goes. This game's at home against a mid-tier SEC team. When you flip it back, just like you went from South Carolina to Tennessee, and you go against an upper-tier SEC team on the road, like, there's only so much that can carry over to that. And the challenges will be different at LSU than they were against Tennessee, but you can put together the best game you can right now. I still think Alabama goes into the LSU game potentially as an underdog, unless A&M really hands it to LSU this week.
And one in the weeds thing, I think you're right about the secondary, but from the perspective of there's going to be a lot of new guys potentially playing back there, especially with Sab out, and knowing what you're going to be facing, not just against Missouri, But the following week, with what LSU likes to do throwing the football, if you get a good Bray Hubbard game, I think you can feel a little bit better about it.
I've said it for years. If you get a good Bray Hubbard game, you got it. Like, you've got it made.
You've said it for years. He's only a second-year player.
I've said it for years. I was on him in high school in Mississippi. They needed Bray Hubbard.
Mike Rodak, big Cole Adams and Bray Hubbard stan. I'll leave you guys with this thought. I think back to last year and how Alabama had a little bit of a rough October, if you guys remember right. They had to go to Texas A&M, won a pretty ugly rock fight 26-20, came back home, played an Arkansas team that was kind of scrappy, had to hang on to win that one 24-21, and then they played, obviously, Tennessee, had to rally to win that one. The difference between last year and this year, one, Saban was the coach. Two, they won all of their October games going into the bye, and then they came out of the bye looking like gangbusters. This year, I'd like to think that if Alabama can get the win on Saturday, that maybe they can take some good vibes into the bye. That might help them, one, from a health standpoint, but two, also just to take an opportunity to take a step back, reset, look at some things. Because then if they are able to get the win on Saturday, that LSU game is everything for their potential postseason hopes to, what they ultimately want this season to turn into. So obviously they got to take care of business against Missouri first. Kalen DeBoer made that point on Monday during his press conference. Kane Womack even made that point on Monday during the press conference. So we'll see what they can pull off. That's all we've got today. I'll be back on Thursday, going to try to link up with Power Mizzou, the newest addition to the 24/7 Sports Network, to discuss Alabama Mizzou in a little bit more depth. Again, that game set for Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central Time on ABC. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports for all of the ongoing coverage of this very weird, very inconsistent, sometimes good, sometimes bad Alabama team. Who knows what we're going to get, right? What was the Forrest Gump line? Life's like a box of chocolates. You never really know what you're going to get. That seems to be this Crimson Tide team this fall. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.